Hello and welcome to the nitty-gritty review for The Shape of Water. This is going to be a spoiler-full review, so if you're looking for something with no spoilers, be sure to check out my itty-bitty spoiler-free review for The Shape of Water. The Shape of Water is the 2017 fantasy film written by Guillermo del Toro and Vanessa Taylor and directed by Del Toro. It stars Sally Hawkins as Eliza, a mute janitor, and Doug Jones as Amphibian Man. If you haven't seen The Shape of Water yet, it's kind of like if the movies King Kong and E.T. had a baby, and that movie baby grew up watching only musicals and monster movies from the 1940s and 50s. It sounds a little weird, but once you see it, I think you'll get what I'm saying. So the first category in the grid is going to be genre. The Shape of Water has a lot of monster movie aspects, as well as fairy tale romance aspects, but it also borrows a lot from sci-fi and horror and even musicals. And what's interesting about the blend of all of these genres is that he really took a lot of the tropes from the 1950s that belonged within these genres, brought them into the modern era, and melded them into one movie. But I think the end result is really a fantasy because of the tone throughout the movie. I think there's more tropes that fit the monster movie and sci-fi movie. The tone throughout is very much so a fantasy romance. There's definitely a lot of these other layered elements throughout, and even though he used a lot of tropes from within these different genres, there was still twists and surprises, and it didn't feel too predictable. There were a few things that felt a little bit more predictable. For example, when it was revealed that Amphibian Man has the ability to heal, I kind of saw that one coming from a mile away. It kind of felt very tropish, just the mystical being with the ability to heal, particularly because the main character, Eliza, has a disability where her vocal box has been damaged and she can't speak. But what I really liked is that he took this trope that was a little bit predictable and turn it around at the end of the movie, where instead of giving her the ability to speak, he healed her by essentially turning her into an amphibian woman. I just thought that was a really, really good way to take a trope and a kind of staple of a genre and kind of turning it on its head and having him heal her in a different way than the predictable outcome. So I just thought that was great, and that's another reason why I really felt like this was more of a fantasy movie than anything else, because that was a really kind of fairy tale ending. It was very Little Mermaid. My god, this movie is The Little Mermaid. That just dawned on me. Anyway, this movie is The Little Mermaid. I don't know how I didn't put that together before. I was so distracted by the Beauty and the Beast comparisons. Anyway, so yeah, he just takes all these different elements of genre, layers them together, still creates a fantasy fairy tale, but it still has monster elements, there's musical elements, even aside from the musical number, which is obviously taking that genre to its peak within the movie. There are still little bits and pieces here and there. Even the score just feels like the score from like a 50s musical. Even having it take place in the early 60s gave it kind of a old Hollywood feel, which I think a lot of people associate with musicals. So yeah, just the way he was able to layer in all of these older genre tropes and elements. That's just beautiful, very well done. So yeah, I definitely gave the genre a 10 out of 10. Perfect. So the next category is going to be writing. With pretty much all of Del Toro's movies, the writing is going to be one of the weaker categories. That doesn't mean the writing is weak overall, it's just not as strong as his abilities as a director. A common weakness within his movies is a villain that is written really, really well, but tends to lack a clear motivation, and they become very one-dimensional that way. And I think with The Shape of Water, while I don't need to know the reason for every single thing that the villain, Richard Strickland, does, it would be nice to see why does he hate Amphibian Man so much. It seems personal. And this is true even before, he gets his fingers bit off. And he even says that he doesn't like Amphibian Man, that they didn't get along while they were traveling to the lab. And it would have been nice to see just a little hint to let us know what went wrong. So in that regard, I felt like the characterization of Strickland was just a little bit weak and a little bit one-dimensional. Even though he was very well written, he was definitely intimidating. You definitely felt afraid of him. You felt afraid for Eliza when she was with him. He was a very strong villain in that regard, but as far as motivation goes, there wasn't a lot there. And I think with Del Toro, most of the backstory is left unsaid. For example, we don't really know what happened to Eliza when she was a baby. We know that the scratch marks on her neck very closely resemble the scratch marks that amphibian man leaves on Giles's arm. Nothing's ever said about it. So I like these little things here and there where there's questions unanswered, and I think that can work for villains too. We just need to see that motivation. Why are they doing what they're doing? I also wish we had seen a little bit more of Eliza's internal struggles before the scene where she explains her connection to Amphibian Man to Giles. The scene was really powerful and it worked really well, and I like that we get to hear Giles say her words out loud for them both to hear. I thought that was a really powerful effect and worked a lot better than, say, having subtitles to interpret her sign language. So I really liked that reveal of why she's connected to him. He doesn't know that she's incomplete. However, all that said, before that scene, I didn't really have any indication that she felt incomplete. And I understand that not being able to communicate with everybody is a huge hindrance, and that shouldn't be overlooked, but I just wish we had seen a little bit more of her internal struggle of feeling incomplete, just so that we felt her internal struggle a little bit before it was just spelled out for us. One of the strengths of the script, though, is going to come in the parallels between Eliza and Amphibian Man's relationship, and Giles and his desire for a relationship with the man from the diner. I thought it was really great that when Eliza first explained her connection to Amphibian Man and first explained that she wanted to save him and bring him out of the lab, and Giles, just shuts her down and tells her that that's crazy. And then when he gets turned down, and not just turned down, he gets made to feel like a monster, and he starts to relate to what Eliza was saying about finally finding someone that you have a connection to, and he hasn't found that yet, and so he suddenly realizes how important that connection is. I thought that aspect of the script was really interesting, and I just liked the character of Giles. I also would have liked to see a little bit more of a lead up with the relationship between Eliza and Amphibian Man. We definitely see them build a platonic relationship. She gives him eggs and plays music for him, and they form a relationship that way, but there's no sense of romance. And the story just jumped from Free Willy to Beauty and the Beast very quickly, and I would have liked to see a little bit more of their relationship build up in a romantic way before suddenly they're having sex. It just seemed to come on very abruptly. So I still gave the writing an 8 out of 10 overall, which is going to be an A-. There were definitely some weaknesses within the character arcs and character development, but the plot was very solid, and even within the weaknesses with the character development, the characters were still very strong and very likable. It was just a great story, so even though there are some weaknesses, the strengths outnumber them by far, and I still gave it an A-. So the next category in the grid is going to be the editing and the special effects. Now, the special effects throughout The Shape of Water are amazing. Now, every single shot where you see the Amphibian Man is a cross between practical effects of Doug Jones wearing a rubber suit and computer-generated effects, particularly the face. I think for the most part his facial expressions were CGI'd in later, and his body was either practical or CGI, depending on the scene. I think in the underwater wide shots it was all CGI, and then in the closer up shots it was the more combination of the practical effects with the CGI facial expressions. There's definitely a wide combination between the special effects and the practical effects with the character of Amphibian Man. It was just done so seamlessly. I would have guessed that it was almost all practical effects until I read about it later. And I think the special effects is definitely a category that The Shape of Water is likely to get a nomination in at the Academy Awards. I mean, it's just gorgeous and really, really well done. I thought the pacing of the movie overall was pretty good, especially for a 2-hour movie, but I actually felt like the first act was a little bit rushed, and I'm not sure how much of that is editing stuff out and how much of that is there wasn't stuff in the script to begin with, or stuff was in the scripts but didn't make it on film for one reason or another. I'm not sure exactly what the situation was, but I did feel like the first act was a little bit rushed, and I would have liked to see the relationship between Eliza and Amphibian Man develop a little bit more, like I mentioned within the writing category. So for the editing and special effects category overall, I gave it a 9.2 out of 10, which is going to be a solid A. So the next category in the grid is going to be the sound design. The score in The Shape of Water is amazing. It's very whimsical and happy throughout, which is a nice addition to the more fantasy scenes, but also gives an eerie undertone to some of the more horror or sci-fi scenes. I also loved the use of songs from classic musicals. I thought that really aided the tone. It also helped set the time, since this was a movie taking place in the 60s. And that choice in music really culminated with the musical scene You'll Never Know, performed by Sally Hawkins. which is just a beautiful and unexpected moment where the movie suddenly turns into a musical. But it's really not that sudden because there are a lot of elements from musicals, particularly from that time period, sprinkled in throughout. So I just love that, the way the music, both the score and the soundtrack throughout, led up to that moment, and then just the song choice and the performance of that song itself was really strong and really, really great. I also love the moment towards the beginning of the film when Eliza's riding the bus home and she starts humming along to the score. That was just a great kind of breaking the fourth wall moment that really gave her character a feeling of not just whimsy, but almost magic. It was almost like she didn't belong within the world of that movie and she was trying to break out, which I thought was just a really interesting use of taking non-diegetic music and making it diegetic for just a moment. And I thought that was a great way to tell us a lot about this character who doesn't speak. So it was a great expositional moment. It was a great way to set tone. I thought that was a really brief but a really beautiful moment in the film. The sound effects and the overall soundscape throughout the movie is also incredible. You have some more eerie monster movie type soundscapes, such as when Amphibian Man is first introduced, when he's brought into the lab. And then you also have the underwater scenes. They kind of have the opposite soundscape in a lot of ways. It's not quite silent, it has a little bit of a fantasy whimsy to it, but it's also very natural. The use of silence was also really well implemented in the final scene when both Eliza and Amphibian Man get shot. The gunshots, of course, are very loud, and then it's followed by silence. I literally heard at least one person not quite scream, but more than gasp. So the silence not only lets you get to kind of hear other people's reactions, which I always think is kind of fun in a movie theater, but it also let you as an audience member absorb what just happened and really take on the significance of it, especially because we know that Amphibian Man has the ability to heal. It's pretty predictable that one way or another he's going to heal Eliza. I thought for sure at that point he was going to use his final breath to heal her, not just the gunshot wounds but her vocal cords. So it was a pleasant surprise. Then he healed himself, took her in the ocean, turned her into an amphibian woman. I thought that was a really beautiful twist. But anyway, the use of silence just let people absorb what happened before trying to figure out what's going to happen next? How are they going to get out of this? So for sound, I gave The Shape of Water a perfect 10 out of 10. So the next category in my grade is going to be acting and casting. One of the most talked about aspects of The Shape of Water so far has been the incredible performance by Sally Hawkins. And for good reason. Her performance is phenomenal. She literally, aside from singing You'll Never Know, like I mentioned earlier, she doesn't say anything throughout the whole movie, at least not with her voice, but her facial expressions and her body language and even just the way she signs really tells a whole story in and of itself. Even if you don't have subtitles to interpret what she's signing, which sometimes you didn't, and she really didn't sign that much throughout the movie, but she's able to communicate so much through facial expressions, through body language, through the way she looks at people. It's just really just a crazy strong performance. I think she's a shoo-in to be nominated at the Academy Awards. I would be extremely surprised if she didn't, and I think that I'll have to wait until I see the list to say for certain. My prediction is that she's going to win. And even though it goes without saying that Hawkins is the star of The Shape of Water, I do think it's a little bit of a shame that people aren't talking more about Doug Jones. He also doesn't say anything throughout the whole movie, and and he also has to wear a whole suit of rubber and convey these emotions. And even though, most of his facial expressions throughout the movie are CGI, keyframed in based on his facial expressions, so it's still based on his performance, and I just think he's a phenomenal actor, and he's so good at the physicality of his characters, regardless of what he has to wear and how many, prosthetics he has or how thick the rubber suit is, and I just wish more people talked about him. The supporting cast was also very strong. Octavia Spencer was of course amazing as always, and Richard Jenkins gave an amazing performance as Giles, and the always creepy Michael Shannon gave a very strong performance as the villain Richard Strickland. I particularly liked Richard Jenkins' performance as Giles. He did a great job of portraying a character with a wonderful balance of strength and vulnerability, humor and stoicism. A lot of those qualities would have come through just based on the script, but his performance really got those messages and those themes across, and he expressed it in just such a realistic and fascinating way that I just found really intriguing, and I just found myself wanting to know more about his character, but I was glad we didn't get that much information about him because it's not his story. So the acting and casting throughout The Shape of Water, I gave another perfect 10 out of 10. So the next category in my grid is going to be the directing and cinematography. Now when it comes to lighting, I'm definitely a sucker for the low-key lighting and the rich color palette and just the general style that Del Toro's movies tend to have. But in The Shape of Water, I particularly liked the way the lighting and the mise-en-scène combined to give visual homages to classic 50s paintings. The diner scenes with Giles felt very much so like Hopper's Nighthawks, while the scenes with Strickland in his home felt very Rockwellian. The cinematography throughout most of the scenes in which the amphibian man appears also very strongly evoked comparisons to 40s monster movies as well as 80s kind of fantasy movies along the lines of E.T. The cinematography throughout did an amazing job of balancing kind of the mood and the storytelling aspects while also still feeling realistic enough to not be distracting, and it was just amazingly gorgeous throughout. I especially liked that in the few scenes where Eliza wasn't present, the lighting took on a much more starkly realistic tone, which kind of aided to the feeling that Eliza herself is kind of magical or whimsical. Like I mentioned before with the music when she starts humming along to the score, and then you have the fact that the scenes that she's in tend to have the richer color palette and the more fantastical lighting and mise-en-scène. So overall, it should come as no surprise that the directing and cinematography category for The Shape of Water got a perfect 10 out of 10. Alright, so I'm going to combine the next two categories, and that's going to be the character aesthetics and the environmental aesthetics. So character aesthetics is going to be hair, makeup, and costumes, while environmental aesthetics is going to be sets, props, and locations. Now, The Shape of Water is a period piece taking place in the early 1960s, but it's also a monster movie with a creature as its leading man. This is a really risky move because if you get any of the details wrong with either the period setting or the creature, it could ruin the whole movie. But with The Shape of Water, thankfully, both of those areas just excel to the max. I already talked about how great the combination of practical effects and CGI is with Amphibian Man, and then the period piece aspects are just phenomenal. You have amazing costumes and hair throughout, and even just the fabric choices and the color choices of the costumes really contribute to the color palette and the cinematography. And you also gotta love the sets like the 1960s movie theater or the high-tech 60s lab. Like many of the categories before it, I have to give it a perfect 10 out of 10 for both character aesthetics and environmental aesthetics. So next category in the grid is going to be impact on film, which I break up into 3 subcategories: critical impact, cult impact, and inspirational impact. Now for movies as new as The Shape of Water, for both cult and critical impacts, I typically just look to Rotten Tomatoes for my scores. Now for critical impact, The Shape of Water has a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes as of the recording of this video, and the average score is going to be an 8.2 out of 10. So I kind of averaged out those two scores and gave the critical impact for The Shape of Water a 4.5 out of 5. The audience score is going to be slightly lower at an 84% with an average rating of 4.1 out of 5. So I averaged those scores out again and gave The Shape of Water a 4 out of 5 for cult impact. And for inspirational impact, I went ahead and gave The Shape of Water a 5 out of 5. And I did that for a combination of reasons, primarily because Guillermo del Toro's work tends to be very inspirational, but also because this movie particularly is extremely well made, and I think one of his best. I think Pan's Labyrinth might be a little bit better, but we'll see with multiple viewings. I might change my mind on that. And Pan's Labyrinth has been very, very inspirational, so I just went ahead and gave them kind of the same score, at least for now. Could change in time, but I went ahead and gave it a 5 out of 5 for the inspirational impact. Those 3 scores are going to average out to a 9 out of 10, which is going to be a solid A for impact on film. The next category in the grid is going to be overall enjoyment, and it should come as no surprise given the ratings throughout this review that I gave The Shape of Water a perfect 10 out of 10 for overall enjoyment. Despite some flaws within the writing, the visuals are extremely stunning, the story is beautiful, and it's just the movie itself is a work of art. And I kind of feel like my perspective on life has changed just a little bit after seeing it. So even though The Shape of Water isn't necessarily a fun movie to watch, it is at times, but not throughout. I really enjoyed the movie overall, and I have no doubt that it's going to be one that I'll go back to again and again, and I'll get something new out of it each time I watch it. So I chose not to give The Shape of Water any extra credit. nothing came to me off the top of my head when I sat down to think about what I would give it extra credit for, and I have no doubt that if I thought about it even a little bit, I could scrounge up something. But the movie was just so phenomenal throughout that I really didn't feel the need to add anything extra. So I just went ahead and let it stand on its own with no extra credit. So the total score for The Shape of Water is going to be a 96.2%, which is going to be a solid A+. It's not quite pushed into that perfect range, but it's very, very close, and it's one of Del Toro's best movies. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's really close to Pan's Labyrinth. It might even be, we'll see with time, it might get to be a little bit better, maybe it'll stay a little bit lower. They're very close. You can go back and watch my review of Pan's Labyrinth and kind of compare. They have similar weaknesses where the writing is concerned, but I think Pan's Labyrinth got away with it a little bit more because it's more of a true fairy tale than The Shape of Water, so it can get away with kind of more archetypical, slightly one-dimensional characters. It passes on that more than The Shape of Water can. So even though they kind of have the same weakness, it worked in Pan's Labyrinth better than it does in Shape of Water. So that's one of the reasons the overall score for Pan's Labyrinth came out as higher. I also gave a lot of extra credit to Pan's Labyrinth, which in retrospect I probably shouldn't have done. In the future, if a movie gets over like at 90%, I'm probably not going to give it extra credit, just because it's, like I said before, standing on its own is a good movie. I don't feel the need to pile on extra credit unless something stands out as really deserving it. But yeah, overall a 96.2, solid A+, particularly considering I didn't give it any extra credit. It's a really good movie. I highly recommend anybody see it, particularly if you enjoyed Pan's Labyrinth. I think you're likely to enjoy this movie. It's just a really good movie, and like I said, I think it changed my perspective on life a little bit and made me think about how people communicate in different ways and aspects of relationships I hadn't thought of before. It's just a really thought-provoking and beautiful movie, and I highly suggest anybody and everybody who's at least 18 years of age should see The Shape of Water. It's amazing. So that's pretty much all I have to say about it. Hey, thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and if you like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to Griddy Films on YouTube and like and share this video. You can also follow Griddy Films on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you'd like to learn more about the Griddy Films grid rating system, you can check out the Griddy Films website, and if you'd like to learn how you can support Griddy Films, you can check out the Griddy Films Patreon page. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.